In this video, we're going to be talking about tips on things to know before moving to Dallas, Texas. So stay tuned. Hey, if this is your first time to the channel, welcome. Glad to meet you. My name is Wendy Pinnell. I am a local real estate broker here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you want to know everything there is to know about living in Dallas, Texas, or tips you need to know before you even move here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and click on that little bell. In this video, like I said, we're going to talk about tips you need to know before you ever even think about moving to Texas. In fact, I'm going to give you 6 tips, so are you ready? Because here comes tip number 1. Let's talk about the cost of living. Now, you're going to find all over the place, some people are going to say, oh, it's a lower cost of living. And some people are going to be like, it is a really high cost of living. And they're both right. Really depends on where you're moving from. So now one thing I think collectively that all of the areas can agree on is that the cost of housing has really gone up in recent years. And it has, there's no denying that. So I did want to give you a couple tips, on how you can, get like more affordable housing here in the Dallas area. The first thing that I would recommend is that you look south of the Metroplex instead of north, because just generally speaking, the north of Dallas and Fort Worth area really tends to be quite a bit more expensive than the south side. And the south side has some fantastic areas with great schools, low crime, and tons of new construction, and they always tend to be less expensive than the north side. Now, another thing I would suggest, if you're looking at that cost of living and housing is really hurting you, another thing you consider is to be a little bit strategic in trying to buy outside city limits, okay? Because if you can get out of those city property taxes, you're going to be in much better shape because your payment will be lower. And speaking of property taxes, they're kind of offset in places like California, where you're going to have a state income tax and corporate tax. Here in the Dallas area, you have property taxes. So you need to be prepared for that to take up a pretty big chunk of your mortgage payment. All right, so far we've talked about, hey, maybe consider south of Dallas. And also if you buy outside of city limits, you can get rid of those city property taxes, right? Another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of these master plan developments, you're going to find HOA fees, and those can really add up when it comes to your monthly payment. And you might also keep a sharp eye out for the MUDs and the PIDs because here in the Dallas area, you're going to find those as well. And they're also going to add to your mortgage payment. So, cost of living might be considered lower, might be considered higher. I think generally groceries are usually lower. But housing is typically considered higher, pretty much everyone. So there are a few tips, if you're looking at affordability for housing, there are a few tips maybe that you can pursue to try to lower that a little bit. All right, so that's tip number 1. Let's move on to tip number 2. All right, tip number 2 is public transportation. Now, I realize that for many of you, you might be like, well, that's no big deal, because maybe where you live right now, you don't have public transportation. But there are plenty of areas that do have public transportation where you never even have to own a car. Okay, so I want you to be prepared that it's unreliable here and it isn't everywhere. In fact, it's in less places than you might think. So Dallas proper and Fort Worth proper, and also Irving, they do have public transportation, but the more you get outward into those suburbs and exurbs, you're not going to find any kind of public transportation there. So, that's definitely the second thing you need to know. Again, may or may not influence or impact you, but let's just say you don't own a car. You got to add that into the cost of living because you're probably going to need one here. So again, just tons of areas without public transportation. Overall, public transportation is fairly rare. All right, moving on to tip number 3. We need to talk about schools. Okay, so what I want you to know about schools is that they vary in a massive way. Okay, now you're gonna find some cities like Frisco and Mansfield, and Plano and, oh goodness, Allen, that the entire city is known for their excellent school districts. But you're gonna find other places where it's very mixed, where you might find, some schools, it's very common, in fact, to see elementary schools with higher ratings and high schools with lower ratings. So you really want to do your research. Greatschools.org or niche.com are excellent resources for that. You really want to do your homework when you're considering where you're going to live. Now, something else I want you to know about schools is you have a ton of choices on schools, okay? You have public schools, but let's just say those don't have, maybe the ratings you want. You also have private schools. You also have charter schools, and homeschooling is huge in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And when you homeschool, guess what? In Texas, it's completely unregulated. You don't have to register with the state. There are no test scores. There's no one that's going to come in and inspect your home. It's just unregulated. And because it's so huge, there are tons of what you would call like cooperatives, where you can send your kiddo for the day and they can take various classes and then come home and do the homework. So you can teach as much as you want to, and you can use these cooperatives to teach the rest. So homeschooling, again, huge here and completely unregulated. Just another school choice. So you notice I'm not saying that they're bad or that they're good, but more that you've got a lot of options, and do your research. All right, now, tip number 4. Everything you've heard about the weather is true. Basically, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you have around 5 months of summer. So really beginning in May and carrying all the way through September, you can expect hot and humid weather, 90s, 95s, 100, okay? Now, as of the time of this video, we are in mid-May. We've had like a string of like 98, 99, 100 degree temperatures. So, what might you consider about that? Well, you know what? You might consider an area with a community pool, or maybe you get a pool yourself. You can put in an above ground pool for about $5,000, so that's not terrible. But just so that you know, everything they say about the weather really is true. You have like 5 months of summer, about 5 months of pretty mild, enjoyable weather, and then about 2 months where it's going to be pretty cold. That's January and February for you. All right, next tip, let's talk about traffic, because in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you're going to run into traffic, especially during the peak traffic hours of 7 to 9 and like 4 to 6 p.m. And pretty much everywhere in Dallas, you have to get on a highway to get there from city to city. And you know what? It only takes one car accident to turn the highway into a parking lot. So just be aware of that. If you find a nice quiet suburb in the town, you're gonna love that. Not as much traffic, but chances are you're gonna have to commute, in which case you'll still deal with traffic. All right, and speaking of jobs, tip number 6, our last tip, jobs are plentiful here, especially if you come with a specific skill set. Like in healthcare, jobs are everywhere. They constantly need people. And also fields like technology and finance and marketing, all of those jobs are in high demand. And you know what, the technology, those kind of, the tall office buildings and whatnot, they tend to cluster mostly in cities to the north. So a lot of times if you don't want that long commute, you can, buy a home in a place like Irving, and Las Colinas probably will have those technology jobs. Also Richardson, Plano, Frisco, these are all high technology hubs, and you can buy there and, cut down on that traffic maybe. All right, so there you have it, 6 tips. Hope they were helpful. If you're moving to Texas now, 6 things you need to think about before you make that big move. Anyway, was this video helpful? I sure hope it was. If it was, the next best thing you could do is hop on over back to my channel, and take a look around, because there are tons of videos. We do vlog tours, we do map tours. I'll tell you what, we have it all on there. And if you want to get used to Dallas and get to know Dallas and Fort Worth, that's the place to be. But listen, in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.